So what I want to demonstrate today is clouds. I've had questions about doing clouds, and I'm going to start with what I think are probably the easiest clouds, and that is to do these sort of stringy type clouds that run through a blue sky. There's a little bit of puffy clouds at the bottom that have hard edges on them. We can either make them that way or we can do it a little bit lighter. Also, the whole idea of how to do the sky and then have the landscape come up and over it later. So let me get going on this. What we're going to need to start with is I'm going to be using ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, and a little bit of phthalo blue. And then down in the landscape, we're going to need burnt sienna. I'm going to need green and the blues. So that's probably all of the only colors that are going to be needed for this. I may also be using a melamine sponge. A Mr. Clean Magic Eraser is what it's available in the grocery store as. So let's get going. Now this type of a sky is done with a wet and wet technique. And so what I'm going to need to do before I start putting anything on my page is to mix up my paints. And the paints that I'm going to need, there's a pretty dark blue up here at the top and it grades down to a lighter blue. I can either use one blue and grade it the whole way, or I can use a couple of blues in here. And I sort of had fun the other day playing with this and using a couple of different blues. So let's mix up 2 or 3 blues here. So this is ultramarine blue that I'm digging out of my palette. I have had my paints in here for a while, so they are partially dry, and they're soft enough that it's easy for me to get a fair amount of paint out of here. Notice that I take my brush and I pull a little extra paint out of the corner and into that puddle. So this ultramarine blue is maybe it's a little too blue to come to the color of that sky. Ultramarine blue tends to lean toward what I would call the warm side. It has a very slight leaning toward purple. So let's add a little bit of phthalo green shade to it, and that should bring it into a little bit nicer color. I should keep this over on this side so I don't have to reach across for it. Yeah, I think I like that color better. So that's our basic color we're going to use. And then I want to also make some cobalt blue down here at the bottom. Cobalt blue is a little bit lighter shade blue straight out of the tube. And it may still need a little phthalo in it, but not very much. So let's mix that in here. My pan is already dirty with blue because I had done some skies the other day and left the paint in the pan. You can always reuse your watercolors. They're water soluble forever, and so they can stay in a pan and you can use them again. So I'm going to add just a little phthalo to that. Yes. So this is a little paler shade of blue right straight out of the pan than the other is. Now, do I still have enough paint? This is always the problem. Better to mix up more paint than you think you're going to need. So put a little more cobalt in there just to be sure. All right. So now I do have a little tiny bit of paint in that water, but I don't think it's going to matter too much. My next step on this is going to be to wet my page because I want this paint to go down here really smooth, and unless I wet the page, I'm going to have a hard time getting it to go down smoothly. So, and I'm just, before I do that, I want to mix a little bit more ultramarine blue here. Just looking at my puddle going, I'm not sure that's quite enough. So let's just get a little more paint in that puddle. Good. That looks good. All right, so now we're going to take this very slightly dirty, but hopefully not too dirty blue water, and I'm going to wet the entire page. So I want to have this, there's several degrees of wetness that you can do. but I want this wet enough that I have a shine all over the page, but I don't have so much water that it wants to just run off the page. So I'm going to just lift a little off with my brush to make sure I'm pretty consistent here. Today is a cool day, so this isn't going to dry really fast. I've got a little extra working time. All right, so now I'm going to start with my lighter blue, and I'm going to think about leaving these whites behind. So I'm not going to put paint everywhere, and this is one reason why I think it's a little easier way to do clouds, this type of clouds where you've got them sort of loose and stringy, because you can play with the wet and wet. And if I don't put paint everywhere, there's going to be some white that stays behind. Doesn't it stay really sort of pretty? And so I'm just sort of thinking about what direction those clouds are moving. And there's a little more down in here that's going to be sort of this gray there. So I'm just put some of that down in there. Now let's go into the darker blue and start feeding up into this dark area up here. Doesn't that just spread so beautiful when it's just a little bit wet? So then I can get this really deep dark blue, and I want it to sort of stop on the edge of some of those clouds there. So I'm going to stop this interesting little spread right in there. Get that right out to the edge of my page. This is even showing my brush marks a little bit. Now it's coming a little bit lighter over on this other side, and we're starting to get streakies over there, which is sort of nice. Okay. And I was afraid I didn't have enough mixed. I want to just add a little bit more in here. If I want that sky to be pretty smooth there, I'm going to need to roll this just a little bit. So we're going to take and roll that around some to get the paint to run up in there. And then let's just let this be. I want to go a little bit darker with my blue down in here, but I still want to leave some whites behind, so I don't want to paint everywhere. See, this has to be done all in one sort of fell swoop. You can't. There's a point when I'm going to have to stop working on it, because if I don't, I'll just make a mess of things. But, okay. And then let's let this be sort of streaky up in here. Now some of these other clouds up in here, maybe I want them to show a little bit more. So I'm rinsing my brush. I'm drying my brush halfway, 3/4 of the way. And I'm going to come in with my brush, and I'm going to lift some places in here with that damp brush, drag them just a little bit so they look natural. And keep in mind that you're never going to be able to duplicate your photograph exactly using this technique. You have to just relax with it, let it say, okay, it's going to do what it's going to do, and enjoy that, because otherwise you're going to get frustrated, and we don't want people to get frustrated. So just a couple little streaks in there, maybe a little streak in there. I'm liking that sky. That's pretty darn nice. Now, if I want to keep some of these harder places in here, I can come in with a clean, dry rag, or I could use a tissue. But I'm going to come in and I'm going to just dry some spots here that's going to be the tops of those clouds. I want to get some of them just a little uneven. And then maybe a longer straight way here, and maybe there. And let's just, they're too even. I want to make some of them a little less even. Let's come up and join a couple of those together. Okay, I think that looks good. Okay, so I need to now stop, leave this alone, let it dry. Not do another thing to it. Until it's completely dry. And once it's completely dry, I could add another layer of color if I needed to. I can come in and paint that lower part of the landscape. So let's go ahead and, oops, there's something else here that's bothering me. Something that's bothering me, and I need to take care of it right now. A little small brush. I want to make sure I don't have very much moisture on this brush, or it's gonna, but I just don't like this little spot right here. I can deal with it. So I don't have very much water in this brush, but I have some paint on it so that I can come in and just be a little streaky beaky there. A little streaky beaky. And so this is a fairly small brush. I can add just some little streaks in a few places. Maybe soften a couple little spots here. Maybe this can come out. I have to be careful to keep this from looking too much like I've used my brush on it. And it's also just right up in here, maybe we want to have this just a little bit lighter. I think this is still wet enough that I can lift. If this dries too much, I'm not going to get any of this off at this point, and then you have to try and think about maybe lifting later, but I don't know if I want to. I'm liking this. Okay, so let's just streak that just a little bit. Okay. Anything else? Maybe these are a little too strong of blue in here. There we go. That looks good. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn this off and see how this video came out.